Truth decays faster than iron. 8 centuries prior, an English parish interred 2 emerald children speaking unearthly dialect. Soon after, a nearby settlement dissolved overnight into cold mist, leaving cooked broth untouched. Monarchic scrawls erased every coordinates. Gray limestone walls rise above the River Thames, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of rain, smoke, and silence. Narrow windows overlook dark water that once reflected royal processions, executions, celebrations, and whispered betrayals. Inside the Tower of London, every passage seems to preserve echoes that history can never fully recover. Few places embody the fragile line between documented fact and enduring mystery more completely than these ancient chambers, where 2 young princes entered the historical record together, then disappeared without explanation. The story begins during one of England's most turbulent dynastic struggles, the Wars of the Roses. In 1483, 12-year-old Edward V became king after the death of his father, Edward IV. His younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, soon joined him within the Tower of London. At the time, the fortress served not only as a prison, but also as a royal residence where monarchs traditionally stayed before their coronation. Nothing about their arrival initially appeared extraordinary. Yet, the expected coronation never came. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, assumed the role of Lord Protector. Within weeks, Parliament declared Edward IV's children illegitimate, citing claims that their father's marriage had not been legally valid. Richard accepted the crown as King Richard III. As political authority shifted, public sightings of the young princes became increasingly rare. Observers reported seeing them less frequently in the tower's gardens and windows. Then, quite suddenly, they disappeared altogether. Contemporary accounts offer remarkably little certainty. Some chroniclers claimed the boys were seen playing within the fortress until late in the summer. Others suggested they simply faded from public view. No official announcement explained their absence. No confirmed burial was recorded. Their silence became one of the greatest unanswered questions in English history. The most widely accepted explanation has long centered on Richard III himself. Many historians argue that removing the princes would have eliminated the strongest rivals to his newly claimed throne. Political motives certainly existed, and later Tudor historians portrayed Richard as a ruthless ruler willing to secure power through violence. William Shakespeare's famous portrayal further cemented this image, presenting Richard as the architect of the boys' deaths. Yet Shakespeare wrote more than a century after the events, drawing heavily upon Tudor-era sources that may have reflected political agendas rather than objective investigation. Alternative possibilities have never entirely disappeared. Some researchers have questioned whether Henry Tudor, who later became Henry VII after defeating Richard III, may have benefited more from the prince's disappearance than Richard himself. If the boys had survived Richard's reign, they would still have represented powerful claimants to the English throne after Henry seized power. Others have suggested that ambitious nobles acting independently could have removed the princes without direct royal orders, hoping to influence the uncertain succession through their own initiative. Even more speculative theories imagine that at least one prince escaped. Throughout the late 15th century, several individuals emerged claiming royal identity, most famously Perkin Warbeck, who insisted he was Richard of Shrewsbury. His story attracted foreign support and considerable political attention before ultimately ending in execution. Whether he genuinely believed his own claims or knowingly embraced a false identity remains impossible to determine with confidence. Physical evidence has done little to settle the debate. In 1674, workers demolishing a staircase inside the tower reportedly uncovered the remains of 2 children buried beneath it. King Charles II ordered the bones placed in Westminster Abbey, where they remain today. Scientific examinations have been limited, and modern requests for advanced DNA analysis have generated considerable debate. Without comprehensive testing, even these remains cannot be linked conclusively to Edward V and his brother. The tower still stands beside the Thames, its stone corridors remarkably unchanged despite the passing centuries. Visitors walk through rooms where certainty gradually gives way to possibility, where documented events dissolve into unanswered silence. Did the princes perish within these walls, or did their true fate unfold somewhere beyond them? Perhaps the greatest mystery is not simply what happened to the two boys, but whether history has already revealed the answer without anyone recognizing it. If the disappearance of two princes reminds us how easily history can lose even those standing at the center of power, another mystery carries us far beyond medieval England, into a landscape where kings sought eternity instead of survival. Here, the questions are different, yet the silence feels remarkably familiar. Golden cliffs rise above the western bank of the Nile, enclosing a valley carved by wind, heat, and thousands of years of memory. At first glance, the Valley of the Kings appears almost barren, its pale limestone ridges offering little hint of what lies hidden beneath the desert floor. Yet, beneath these silent slopes rests one of archaeology's most celebrated discoveries: the tomb of Tutankhamun, a young pharaoh whose burial chamber transformed our understanding of ancient Egypt while leaving countless mysteries unresolved. When British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the sealed entrance in November 1922, he encountered something few believed still existed. Unlike many royal tombs that had been heavily looted during antiquity, Tutankhamun's burial remained astonishingly intact. Beyond a series of sealed doorways stood rooms overflowing with gilded furniture, ceremonial chariots, carved statues, jewelry, weapons, and more than 5,000 carefully arranged objects. Every artifact seemed to preserve a moment frozen more than 3,000 years earlier. Yet, almost immediately, the treasures raised questions that proved more enduring than the gold itself. Tutankhamun ruled during one of Egypt's most politically turbulent eras. His father is widely believed to have been Akhenaten, the pharaoh who abandoned traditional Egyptian religion in favor of the worship of the sun disk Aten. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt gradually restored its ancient gods and temples. Tutankhamun himself changed his name from Tutankhaten, reflecting this dramatic religious reversal. His reign became a bridge between revolution and restoration, but many details surrounding his life remain frustratingly incomplete. Even his death continues to invite debate. For decades, researchers proposed assassination, citing a fracture found near the back of his skull. Popular imagination quickly embraced images of palace conspiracies and royal betrayal. Later examinations, including detailed CT scans, suggested that the apparent damage may have occurred after death during mummification or excavation. Other evidence revealed a severe fracture in one leg, prompting speculation that an accident involving a chariot or another form of trauma could have contributed to his death. DNA studies later indicated that the young king also suffered from multiple health conditions, including malaria and inherited disorders linked to generations of royal intermarriage. Rather than pointing toward a single dramatic event, the evidence paints a far more complicated picture. The tomb itself presents another puzzle. Compared with the monumental resting places of other pharaohs, Tutankhamun's burial chamber is surprisingly modest. Some Egyptologists suggest the young king died unexpectedly, forcing officials to adapt a smaller tomb that may originally have been intended for someone else. Others have noted unusual architectural features, including walls whose proportions differ from neighboring royal tombs. These observations inspired renewed speculation that undiscovered chambers might still exist behind the painted plaster. In recent years, advanced radar surveys have produced conflicting interpretations. Some researchers believe they detected hidden spaces concealed beyond the northern and western walls. One proposal even suggested that these voids could contain the long-lost burial of Queen Nefertiti, whose final resting place has never been confirmed. Subsequent investigations questioned those findings, arguing that the supposed anomalies reflected natural variations within the limestone rather than sealed doorways. The debate remains unresolved, illustrating how modern technology can sometimes deepen uncertainty rather than eliminate it. Then there is the story that has captivated the public for generations, the so-called Curse of the Pharaoh. Following the tomb's discovery, several individuals connected with the excavation died over the following years, including Lord Carnarvon, Carter's financial backer. Newspapers quickly transformed coincidence into legend, describing supernatural warnings placed upon those who disturbed the ancient king's sleep. Scientific explanations have pointed instead to infections, environmental hazards, or simple statistical chance. Even so, the legend refuses to disappear, perhaps because it reflects something older than evidence, a timeless belief that certain places resist surrendering their secrets. Today, the burial chamber stands illuminated for visitors, its painted walls still surrounding the stone sarcophagus where the young pharaoh once rested. Every inscription, every sealed doorway, and every unanswered question reminds us that discovery rarely marks the end of a mystery. Instead, each new finding opens another path into the unknown. After more than a century of study, could Tutankhamun's tomb still conceal truths that neither ancient builders nor modern investigators ever intended the world to uncover? If hidden chambers may still wait behind painted walls in Egypt, another unanswered mystery returns us to medieval England, where no sealed doorway remains to investigate. Instead, the evidence lies scattered through forests, fragmented chronicles, and a single fatal arrow whose true story may never be fully recovered. Ancient oak trees stretch across the rolling landscape of the New Forest, their twisting branches filtering soft light onto quiet clearings that seem untouched by time. Deer move silently between patches of fern, while narrow trails disappear beneath carpets of fallen leaves. It is a place of remarkable peace today, yet one summer afternoon in the year 1100 transformed this woodland into the setting of one of England's most enduring royal mysteries. King William II, better known as William Rufus because of his reddish complexion, had ruled England for 13 years. The son of William the Conqueror, he was an energetic, forceful monarch whose reign was marked by conflict with powerful nobles and repeated disputes with the church. Admired by some and deeply disliked by others, he accumulated enemies as easily as he gathered loyal supporters. His unexpected death would leave behind far more questions than answers. On August 2nd, William joined a hunting party in the New Forest accompanied by several noblemen, including Walter Tyrrell, an experienced Norman knight. Hunting was more than recreation for medieval kings. It demonstrated authority, skill, and courage while reinforcing the bonds between ruler and aristocracy. The forest, however, also carried an uneasy reputation. Local traditions claimed the land had been cursed after villages were cleared to create royal hunting grounds, and several members of the Norman royal family had already died there under unusual circumstances. As the afternoon unfolded, the hunters gradually spread apart through the trees. According to the most familiar account, Walter Tyrrell released an arrow intended for a deer. The shaft struck a tree, glanced away, and fatally pierced the king's chest. William reportedly died almost instantly. Tyrrell fled England soon afterward, insisting he had never fired the fatal shot and was nowhere near the king when he fell. His departure has often been interpreted as evidence of guilt, yet fleeing after the sudden death of a king may also have been the most practical decision for any nobleman hoping to avoid immediate suspicion. The official version describes a tragic hunting accident. Yet even medieval chroniclers expressed doubts. The circumstances surrounding William's death proved remarkably convenient for certain individuals. His younger brother Henry acted with astonishing speed. Rather than remaining beside the king's body, Henry rode directly to Winchester to secure the royal treasury. Within days, he had claimed the English crown, becoming King Henry I. His rapid response demonstrated political skill, but it also fueled speculation that the succession may have been anticipated rather than improvised. Could Henry have known more than the surviving records reveal? Some historians caution against reading conspiracy into efficient action. Medieval politics demanded immediate decisions. Any hesitation following a monarch's death could invite rebellion or competing claims to the throne. From this perspective, Henry simply recognized an opportunity and moved decisively before rivals could organize. Others remain less convinced. William's reign had alienated influential church leaders, ambitious nobles, and members of his own family. His death solved numerous political problems at once. The scarcity of reliable eyewitness testimony only deepens uncertainty. Most surviving chronicles were written years later by authors whose loyalties, religious beliefs, or political interests inevitably shaped their narratives. Distinguishing observation from interpretation becomes increasingly difficult with every passing century. Even the treatment of the king's body adds another curious detail. Contemporary accounts describe William's corpse being abandoned in the forest after many members of the hunting party dispersed. Eventually, a local charcoal burner is said to have transported the body by cart to Winchester Cathedral for burial. The image is striking. A king who had ruled England carried not by nobles in solemn procession, but by an ordinary laborer through woodland paths, while those closest to him vanished into the distance. Legends soon gathered around the event. Some interpreted the death as divine judgment for William's harsh rule and frequent conflicts with the church. Others pointed to the supposed curse resting upon the New Forest itself, recalling earlier royal deaths in the same landscape. Modern historians generally view such stories as reflections of medieval belief rather than historical evidence. Yet they reveal how quickly unexplained events invite symbolic meaning. Today, a weathered stone known as the Rufus Stone marks the traditional location where the king supposedly fell. Whether it identifies the exact spot remains uncertain, but visitors still pause beneath the ancient trees, imagining the silence that followed the release of one unseen arrow. Was it an unfortunate accident shaped by chance alone, or did the forest conceal intentions that no chronicler dared record? Somewhere between the fading echoes of hoofbeats and the shadows beneath the oaks, the true story may still remain beyond reach. If the death of William II leaves us wondering whether a single arrow altered the course of English history by chance or by design, another royal mystery asks an even more unsettling question. What if a king's reported death was only the beginning of the story, rather than its final chapter? Thick stone walls rise above the River Severn, their towers casting long shadows across the grounds of Berkeley Castle. Within these medieval fortifications, narrow corridors wind toward chambers that have witnessed centuries of power, imprisonment, and political calculation. The silence inside the castle feels almost deliberate, as though its ancient masonry has guarded one particular secret for more than 700 years. It is here that King Edward II is traditionally believed to have spent his final days, although exactly what happened within those walls remains one of medieval England's greatest unanswered mysteries. Edward II inherited the English throne in 1307 after the death of his formidable father, Edward I. His reign quickly became troubled by military setbacks, political instability, and growing resentment among the nobility. His devastating defeat at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 weakened royal authority, while his close relationships with powerful favorites, most notably Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser the Younger, intensified conflict within the kingdom. Whether those relationships were political, deeply personal, or a combination of both continues to be debated, but there is little doubt that they shaped how many contemporaries viewed the king. By 1326, opposition had reached a breaking point. Edward's queen, Isabella of France, joined forces with the exiled noble Roger Mortimer. Together, they invaded England, gathering widespread support from nobles eager for change. Edward's government collapsed with remarkable speed. Hugh Despenser was captured and executed, while the king himself was arrested. In January 1327, Parliament formally removed Edward from the throne, replacing him with his teenage son, who became Edward III. The former king disappeared into captivity. According to the traditional account, Edward was transferred between several secure locations before arriving at Berkeley Castle. Several months later, in September 1327, news spread that the deposed king had died. Official announcements offered few details. Medieval chronicles simply reported his death, leaving later generations to wonder how such an inconvenient prisoner had met his end. Over time, one story came to dominate popular imagination. Centuries after the event, writers described a horrifying execution involving a heated metal rod, supposedly chosen to leave no visible external wounds. The tale became one of medieval history's most infamous episodes, repeated in countless books, plays, and documentaries. Yet, modern historians increasingly question whether this dramatic account has any reliable foundation. The earliest detailed descriptions appeared decades after Edward's reported death, raising serious doubts about their authenticity. Contemporary records remain noticeably restrained, offering nothing resembling the gruesome legend that later became so familiar. If the famous story is doubtful, what alternatives remain? One possibility is that Edward was quietly murdered by suffocation, starvation, or another less elaborate method. His continued existence represented a serious political threat. As long as the former king remained alive, rival factions could attempt to restore him to power. Eliminating him would have removed that danger permanently. Yet another theory challenges an even more fundamental assumption. What if Edward never died at Berkeley Castle at all? Among the most intriguing pieces of evidence is a document known as the Fieschi Letter, written by an Italian cleric several years after Edward's reported death. The letter claims that the former king escaped imprisonment, traveled across Europe disguised as a pilgrim, and eventually lived out his remaining years as a religious hermit. Although historians continue to debate the letter's credibility, it presents an unexpectedly detailed alternative narrative that cannot be dismissed simply because it contradicts the official version. Additional questions emerge from Edward III's own behavior after assuming full authority. Once Mortimer was overthrown in 1330, the young king ordered his former guardian executed, but never publicly reopened the investigation into his father's death. Was this because he accepted the official account without question, or because uncovering the truth risked exposing political realities that were better left undisturbed? Even Edward II's tomb at Gloucester Cathedral adds another layer of uncertainty. The magnificent monument quickly became a place of pilgrimage, attracting visitors who honored the fallen king. Yet, medieval people rarely had opportunities to verify the identity of those buried within elaborate royal tombs. Could the monument truly contain Edward's remains, Or did it simply commemorate the version of events that served the kingdom best? Today, Berkeley Castle still overlooks the surrounding countryside, its towers standing much as they did in the 14th century. The rooms associated with Edward's imprisonment remain among its most compelling spaces, inviting visitors to imagine conversations, decisions, and silences that no chronicler fully recorded. Whether Edward II died as a helpless captive, escaped into anonymity, or became the center of a carefully constructed political narrative, one question continues to linger within those ancient walls. Did England lose a king in 1327, or did it lose the truth about him instead? If Edward II's fate reminds us that a king can disappear behind conflicting accounts and uncertain testimony, another royal mystery shifts our attention from a missing ruler to missing symbols of authority themselves. This time, the silence belongs not to a prison chamber, but to a stretch of tidal marsh where history and landscape have become almost impossible to separate. Wide salt marshes extend toward the horizon, their surfaces changing with every tide. Shallow channels weave through mudflats that glisten beneath pale skies, while distant patches of water appear and disappear as the sea steadily reshapes the land. Along England's eastern coast, the Wash is a place where familiar paths can vanish within hours, swallowed beneath rising water before revealing themselves once again. For centuries, travelers have respected its unpredictable nature. According to one of medieval England's most enduring legends, somewhere beneath these shifting sands may rest the lost crown jewels of King John. The story unfolds during the final months of one of England's most controversial monarchs. King John, remembered for sealing Magna Carta in 1215 after prolonged conflict with his barons, spent much of his reign defending his authority against rebellion, foreign threats, and financial hardship. By the autumn of 1216, civil war had weakened the kingdom. French forces had entered England in support of rebellious nobles, and John was moving constantly across the country, attempting to regain control of a rapidly deteriorating political situation. Time was becoming his greatest enemy. In October 1216, while traveling through eastern England, John's baggage train reportedly attempted to cross the estuary of the Wash. Unlike modern coastlines, the medieval crossing relied upon carefully timed routes that became accessible only during low tide. Experienced local guides understood the rhythm of the sea, but even small miscalculations could prove disastrous. The tides returned quickly, transforming open ground into dangerous channels of fast-moving water. According to several contemporary chroniclers, disaster struck during the crossing. The baggage wagons, loaded with royal possessions, became trapped as floodwaters rushed across the marsh. Horses, carts, supplies, and valuable treasures were swallowed by mud and rising tides. Among the reported losses were the king's crown, ceremonial regalia, precious jewels, and other objects representing the authority of the English monarchy. Only days later, King John himself fell seriously ill and died at Newark Castle, leaving behind both a kingdom in crisis and an extraordinary mystery. Yet, even the earliest accounts leave important questions unanswered. Chroniclers agree that valuable baggage was lost, but they rarely describe the missing objects in precise detail. Did the royal crown truly disappear into the marshes, or did later generations gradually enlarge the story? Medieval writers often emphasize dramatic events to illustrate the unpredictability of fortune, especially when describing rulers whose reigns had been marked by controversy. Separating historical reporting from symbolic storytelling is not always straightforward. Some historians suggest the losses may have been less catastrophic than tradition claims. Medieval kings possessed multiple ceremonial objects, and inventories from the period are incomplete. Certain treasures may already have been stored elsewhere or recovered after the incident without attracting significant attention. Others argue that the surviving records indicate a genuine disaster, whose full financial and political consequences were softened by later administrations eager to restore confidence in the monarchy. The landscape itself complicates every investigation. Over 8 centuries, coastlines around the Wash have changed dramatically. Rivers have shifted course, marshes have expanded or disappeared, and layers of sediment have buried earlier ground beneath meters of mud. Even if the treasure entered the estuary exactly as described, the original location may now lie far from the modern shoreline, hidden beneath deposits that accumulated over hundreds of years. From time to time, searches have attempted to locate traces of the missing convoy. Archaeologists, historians, and treasure hunters have all examined historical maps, geological surveys, and medieval records in hopes of identifying the ancient crossing. Despite advances in technology, no confirmed discovery has ever revealed the royal regalia. Metal objects recovered from the region have never provided convincing evidence that the legendary treasure has been found. More imaginative theories have naturally followed. Some propose that the jewels were never lost at all, but deliberately concealed to prevent them from falling into enemy hands during the Civil War. Others speculate that the convoy was attacked before reaching the crossing, and that the story of the flood offered a convenient explanation for valuables that had already disappeared. While no surviving evidence firmly supports these ideas, they demonstrate how easily uncertainty invites alternative possibilities. Today, the tides continue their endless cycle across the Wash, erasing footprints almost as quickly as they appear. The sea reveals fragments of the past, while concealing others beneath layers of shifting sand and silt. Somewhere beneath that quiet landscape, perhaps nothing remains beyond ordinary medieval debris, or perhaps the symbols of a troubled king's authority still rest where the water claimed them more than 800 years ago. Until the marshes surrender their secrets, the fate of King John's crown jewels remains suspended between documented history, enduring legend, and the silent rhythm of the tides themselves. If the tides of the Wash remind us how landscapes can swallow crowns, wagons, and certainty itself, the next mystery asks us to consider something even more elusive. Sometimes, what disappears is not an object but an explanation, leaving behind a story that has resisted every attempt to fit neatly into history. Gentle fields roll across the Suffolk countryside, bordered by hedgerows, narrow lanes, and patches of ancient woodland. At first glance, the village of Woolpit seems little different from countless rural settlements scattered across medieval England. Its name comes from the wolf pits once dug nearby to trap predators that threatened livestock. Today, those pits exist mainly in memory, yet, according to one of England's most remarkable medieval accounts, they became the unlikely setting for an encounter that has puzzled historians for centuries. Sometime during the 12th century, villagers reportedly discovered 2 children wandering near one of these pits. They were a boy and a girl, frightened, confused, and unlike anyone the villagers had ever seen. Their skin carried a distinct green tint. Their clothing was unfamiliar in both color and design. Most curious of all, they spoke a language that nobody present could recognize. The story survives primarily through 2 respected medieval chroniclers, Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh. Although their accounts differ in certain details, both describe an event that they apparently considered worthy of serious record rather than simple folklore. Neither writer claims to have witnessed the discovery personally, but both gathered information from individuals believed to have known those involved. According to these accounts, the children initially refused every type of food offered to them except freshly harvested beans. For days, they survived almost entirely on the contents of bean pods until they gradually adapted to ordinary meals. As time passed, the green color of their skin reportedly faded. the boy became ill and died not long afterward, but the girl survived, eventually learning English and integrating into local society. Once she could communicate, her explanation only deepened the mystery. She claimed that she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where perpetual twilight covered the landscape. According to her description, the sun never shone brightly there. Everything existed beneath a dim, peaceful light. The inhabitants shared the children's unusual green complexion, and the land itself seemed separated from the familiar world by an unknown boundary. One day, while tending livestock, they heard the sound of church bells, entered a cave, and wandered through darkness before emerging unexpectedly near Woolpit. Could such an account simply reflect the imagination of a frightened child struggling to describe unfamiliar experiences? Many historians believe so. One widely accepted explanation suggests the children were Flemish refugees. During the 12th century, political violence displaced many Flemish communities living in eastern England. Orphaned children speaking a foreign language could easily have confused local villagers. Their unusual skin color may have resulted from chlorosis or severe nutritional deficiencies, conditions capable of producing a pale, greenish appearance that gradually disappeared with proper nourishment. Their strange clothing and unfamiliar speech would naturally reinforce the impression that they had come from somewhere entirely unknown. Yet, not every detail fits comfortably within that interpretation. The repeated emphasis on St. Martin's Land has encouraged alternative readings. Some researchers have proposed that the children described an underground settlement or isolated valley whose lighting conditions appeared permanently dim. Others have interpreted the account symbolically, viewing it as a religious allegory about crossing between spiritual worlds rather than a literal historical event. More speculative theories move even further beyond conventional history. Some have imagined that the children crossed into medieval England from another dimension, another timeline, or even another world entirely. Advocates of such ideas point to the persistent references to perpetual twilight, unfamiliar language, and sudden appearance without any obvious route of travel. While these suggestions remain outside mainstream historical scholarship and lack supporting evidence, they demonstrate the extraordinary power of a narrative that refuses easy explanation. The passage of time has only added to the uncertainty. Woolpit itself preserves no physical evidence connected to the children beyond local tradition and the surviving written accounts. Archaeology cannot confirm their existence. Contemporary administrative records remain silent. Everything rests upon medieval chronicles, composed by men attempting to distinguish remarkable events from ordinary rumor. Today, visitors walking through the quiet Suffolk village find peaceful streets where everyday life unfolds much as it has for generations. Nothing immediately suggests that this landscape once inspired one of England's most enduring mysteries. Yet perhaps that is precisely what makes the story so compelling. Somewhere between history, memory, folklore, and human misunderstanding, two children appeared without clear origin and left behind questions that have never entirely faded. Were they simply lost strangers viewed through the uncertainties of medieval life, or did their story preserve a fragment of reality that modern understanding has not yet learned how to explain? If the green children of Woolpit remind us that identity can become blurred by unfamiliar languages, distant origins, and incomplete records, the next mystery carries that uncertainty into the heart of royal politics. This time, the question is not where someone came from, but whether England unknowingly rejected its rightful king. The stone walls of the Tower of London rise with quiet authority above the River Thames, their weathered surfaces bearing witness to centuries of coronations, imprisonments, and contested claims. Every chamber seems to preserve echoes of names that shaped the kingdom's destiny. Among them is one name that continues to divide historians more than 500 years later, Perkin Warbeck, a man who claimed not merely noble blood, but a crown. The story begins during the uncertain years following the Wars of the Roses. Henry VII had secured the English throne after defeating Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, bringing an end to decades of dynastic conflict. Yet, victory on the battlefield did not erase lingering doubts. Many members of the House of York remained alive, and rumors persisted that one of the missing princes in the tower might somehow have survived. Into this atmosphere of uncertainty stepped a young man whose appearance and confidence attracted immediate attention. Around 1491, Perkin Warbeck emerged in continental Europe claiming to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the two princes who had disappeared inside the Tower of London nearly a decade earlier. According to his account, he had escaped the fate that supposedly claimed his brother, lived in secrecy abroad, and was now returning to reclaim the throne that rightfully belonged to him. The claim was extraordinary. Even more remarkable was the number of influential figures who accepted it. Margaret of Burgundy, sister of Edward IV and aunt to the missing princes, publicly recognized Warbeck as her nephew. Foreign rulers, including the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I and King James IV of Scotland, also offered varying degrees of support. These were experienced political leaders with access to diplomats, merchants, and noble informants. Were they simply exploiting an opportunity to weaken Henry VII, or did they see convincing evidence that Warbeck truly possessed royal blood? Henry VII never treated the matter lightly. The Tudor government devoted significant resources to tracking Warbeck's movements, disrupting his supporters, and countering his claims. Such determination may simply reflect the danger posed by any convincing pretender during a fragile new dynasty. Yet, some historians wonder whether the intensity of the response also reflected genuine uncertainty within Henry's own government. If Warbeck had been an obvious fraud, why invest so much effort in discrediting him across Europe? The traditional explanation identifies Warbeck as the son of a Flemish customs official from the city of Tournai. According to the official confession he signed after his capture, he admitted inventing his royal identity under the influence of foreign supporters seeking to challenge Henry's rule. Tudor chroniclers accepted this account and portrayed him as an ambitious impostor manipulated by powerful enemies of England. But that confession presents its own difficulties. It was written while Warbeck lived under royal custody, following the collapse of his military campaigns, and after every realistic hope of success had vanished. Was it an honest admission, or a statement made under overwhelming political pressure? Medieval prisoners often confessed to narratives that satisfied those holding power, especially when their lives depended upon royal mercy. Certain details continue to puzzle researchers. Contemporaries frequently commented on Warbeck's refined manners, education, and familiarity with courtly customs. He reportedly spoke several languages with confidence and conducted himself comfortably among European nobility. Such qualities were not impossible for the son of a merchant, particularly in the commercially connected cities of Flanders, but they also aligned remarkably well with the upbringing expected of someone raised within aristocratic circles. Then there is the enduring shadow cast by the princes in the tower themselves. Because the fate of Richard of Shrewsbury has never been conclusively established, every later claimant inevitably benefits from that uncertainty. Without definitive evidence proving the prince's death, complete certainty about Warbeck's identity remains just beyond reach. His claim survives because the earlier mystery was never fully resolved. More speculative interpretations suggest that fragments of truth may have become mixed with political invention. Perhaps Warbeck genuinely believed stories told about his origins. Perhaps he resembled the missing prince closely enough for others to build an identity around him. Or perhaps Europe became the stage for an elaborate political drama in which absolute truth mattered less than the influence a believable story could achieve. Today, Perkin Warbeck remains suspended between history and possibility. Official records call him an impostor. Contemporary supporters called him a king. Centuries of investigation have narrowed the debate, but never entirely closed it. In the absence of unquestionable evidence, one unsettling thought continues to linger through the corridors of English history. Did England witness the downfall of an ambitious pretender, or the execution of a man whose true identity disappeared alongside the secrets of the Tower itself? If Perkin Warbeck's claim leaves us wondering whether a forgotten prince briefly returned to challenge a king, another chapter reveals that he was not the first mysterious figure to threaten the Tudor throne. Years earlier, a different boy had appeared at the center of an equally remarkable conspiracy, raising a question that still lingers today. Who was truly directing the game from behind the curtain? Grey castle walls overlook the Irish Sea, their towers standing against winds that have carried merchants, soldiers, and whispered alliances for centuries. Within medieval fortresses and royal courts, power rarely announced itself openly. Decisions were often shaped behind closed doors, through quiet conversations, private loyalties, and ambitions carefully concealed beneath displays of honor. It was in this world of shifting allegiances that a young boy named Lambert Simnel unexpectedly became the focus of one of the earliest challenges to England's new Tudor monarchy. The year was 1487, only 2 years after Henry VII had secured the throne at the Battle of Bosworth. Although the Wars of the Roses had officially ended, the kingdom remained deeply divided. Many Yorkist supporters refused to accept Tudor rule, believing that the rightful royal bloodline had not yet been extinguished. In such an uncertain political climate, identity itself could become a powerful weapon. Lambert Simnel was reportedly the son of an ordinary tradesman, though even his early life remains difficult to reconstruct with certainty. According to contemporary accounts, he came under the guidance of a priest named Richard Simons, who recognized that the boy possessed a striking resemblance to noble ancestry. At first, Simons allegedly planned to present Simnel as Richard, Duke of York, one of the missing princes in the Tower. Soon afterward, however, the strategy changed dramatically. Instead, the boy was introduced as Edward, Earl of Warwick. This claim appeared far more convincing than it might seem today. The real Edward, Earl of Warwick, was indeed alive, but Henry VII had imprisoned him securely within the Tower of London. Outside the capital, very few people had ever seen the young nobleman. For many supporters of the House of York, verifying his identity was virtually impossible. A carefully coached substitute could therefore appear surprisingly believable. Yet, the greatest mystery does not concern Lambert Simnel himself. It concerns the influential people who chose to support him. The conspiracy quickly attracted remarkable allies. John de la Pole, Earl of Lincoln, a respected Yorkist noble with his own royal connections, became one of Simnel's strongest advocates. Margaret of Burgundy, sister of Edward IV and one of the most determined opponents of Henry VII, supplied financial assistance and arranged for experienced German mercenaries to reinforce the rebellion. In Ireland, powerful nobles accepted Simnel enthusiastically, even crowning him King Edward VI during a formal ceremony in Dublin. These were not inexperienced dreamers. They were seasoned political figures who understood the enormous risks involved in supporting a false claimant. Why would they commit wealth, military resources, and personal reputations to a boy whose identity could potentially collapse under careful examination? The traditional explanation argues that Simnel served merely as a convenient symbol. His personal identity mattered less than his usefulness as a rallying point around which dissatisfied Yorkists could unite. In this interpretation, the rebellion was driven not by belief in the boy himself, but by determination to remove Henry VII from power through any plausible alternative. Even so, certain details invite further reflection. John de la Pole had spent years within the highest circles of English nobility. If anyone possessed knowledge about the surviving members of the royal family, it was surely him. Did he genuinely believe Simnel represented the imprisoned Earl of Warbeck? Or did political necessity outweigh private certainty? Medieval loyalty often required difficult choices where legitimacy, survival, and ambition became impossible to separate. Some historians have proposed that Simnel's backers never expected permanent success. Instead, they may have viewed the rebellion as a means of testing Henry VII's authority during the fragile early years of Tudor rule. If public support proved stronger than anticipated, the movement could gather momentum. If it failed, another claimant might emerge later under more favorable circumstances. That possibility seems especially intriguing when viewed alongside later events. Only a few years after Simnel's defeat at the Battle of Stoke Field, another claimant appeared: Perkin Warbeck. The similarities between the two episodes have led some researchers to wonder whether elements of the same political network survived, adapting their methods while searching for increasingly convincing royal identities. Rather than isolated uprisings, perhaps these challenges formed part of a longer and more organized campaign against the Tudor dynasty. Henry VII's response was equally revealing. Instead of executing Lambert Simnel after the rebellion collapsed, the king showed unexpected mercy. The young pretender was employed in the royal kitchens and later promoted to the position of falconer. Such leniency suggests that Henry viewed the boy less as the true danger than as an instrument manipulated by far more influential hands. The architects of the conspiracy, not its youthful figurehead, had always been the greater concern. Today, the names of many who financed, encouraged, or quietly sympathized with the rebellion have faded into incomplete records and scattered chronicles. Their private conversations, motives, and expectations remain hidden behind centuries of silence. Was Lambert Simnel simply a carefully chosen mask worn by ambitious nobles? Or did even his powerful supporters believe they were defending the rightful heir to England's throne? Somewhere within the forgotten alliances of medieval politics, the answer may still be waiting. If Lambert Simnel's story reveals how hidden alliances could place an unknown boy at the center of a struggle for the English crown, the next mystery reminds us that political power was just as often shaped by words as by armies. Sometimes, a single sentence could prove more dangerous than a battlefield, leaving historians to wonder where responsibility truly begins. Tall, stained glass windows cast shifting patterns of colored light across the worn stone floor of Canterbury Cathedral. Massive pillars disappear into vaulted ceilings, while centuries of whispered prayers seem to linger beneath the echo of every footstep. Near the eastern end of the cathedral lies a place forever connected with one of medieval England's most shocking acts of violence. Here, on a winter evening in 1170, Archbishop Thomas Becket was struck down before the altar, transforming a sacred space into the scene of a mystery that has endured for more than 800 years. The facts surrounding the killing are well documented. The question of who truly ordered it is not. Thomas Becket had once been among the closest companions of King Henry II. As Chancellor of England, he served the king with remarkable energy and loyalty. Their friendship appeared unshakable, and when Henry appointed Becket as Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162, many believed the king had secured a trusted ally at the head of the English Church. Instead, everything changed. After becoming Archbishop, Becket embraced the independence of the Church with unexpected determination. Disputes soon emerged over legal authority, taxation, and the limits of royal power. Henry believed that clergy accused of crimes should answer to royal courts under certain circumstances. Becket insisted that ecclesiastical law remained beyond the king's control. What began as a legal disagreement gradually evolved into a personal confrontation that divided England's political and religious elite. Years of exile followed. Becket spent much of the 1160s in France after refusing to submit to the king's demands. Although temporary agreements were reached from time to time, trust between the two men steadily eroded. When Becket finally returned to England in 1170, hopes for reconciliation quickly dissolved as new conflicts emerged almost immediately. Then came the words that history has never fully untangled. According to later accounts, Henry II erupted in frustration after hearing of Becket's latest actions. Chroniclers preserve several versions of the king's outburst, the most famous being, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" Whether Henry spoke those exact words remains uncertain. Contemporary sources record different phrases, and none can claim absolute certainty. Yet, whatever the wording, 4 knights interpreted the king's anger as a command. Reginald Fitzurse, Hugh de Morville, William de Tracy, and Richard le Breton crossed the English Channel and traveled to Canterbury. On December 29, 1170, they confronted Becket inside the cathedral. After a heated exchange, swords were drawn. The archbishop was struck repeatedly until he collapsed on the stone floor, dying within one of Christianity's most sacred spaces. The murder shocked Europe. Almost immediately, attention turned toward Henry II. Did the king deliberately order the assassination, trusting loyal followers to carry out his wishes? Or had the knights acted independently, believing they would earn royal favor by eliminating the monarch's greatest obstacle? The traditional view occupies an uneasy middle ground. Most historians agree there is no surviving evidence of a formal order authorizing Becket's death. No written instruction exists. No reliable witness describes Henry privately planning an assassination. Instead, many scholars believe the king's emotional outburst was interpreted literally by men eager to demonstrate loyalty. In a medieval court where royal words carried immense authority, even an expression of frustration could easily become something far more dangerous. Yet, alternative interpretations continue to attract attention. Some researchers argue that Henry, an experienced and politically sophisticated ruler, understood exactly how his language would be received. Even without issuing explicit instructions, he may have expected decisive action while preserving plausible deniability if events turned disastrous. Others suggest the knights exceeded every expectation, acting with far greater violence than the king ever intended. Another possibility focuses less on Henry himself than on the political culture surrounding him. Medieval courts often rewarded initiative taken in service of royal interests. Could the knights have convinced themselves they were fulfilling the king's unspoken wishes without ever receiving direct authorization? If so, responsibility becomes far more difficult to define. The aftermath only deepened the complexity. Public outrage spread rapidly across Christendom. Reports of miracles associated with Becket's tomb soon circulated, and within just 3 years he was canonized as a saint. Henry II, facing enormous political and religious pressure, performed a public act of penance at Canterbury, allowing monks to scourge him in a powerful display of humility. Some viewed this as sincere remorse. Others interpreted it as a carefully calculated effort to restore his reputation while stabilizing his kingdom. Today, pilgrims and visitors still stand within Canterbury Cathedral, where the quiet stone floor conceals the echoes of that winter evening. The swords are long gone, the witnesses have faded into history, and the king's exact words can never be recovered with certainty. Yet, one question continues to linger beneath the vaulted ceiling. Did Thomas Becket die because a monarch gave an order, because 4 knights misunderstood their king, or because ambition and loyalty together created a command that was never actually spoken? If the death of Thomas Becket leaves us questioning whether responsibility can vanish behind carefully chosen words, another mystery leads us to a battlefield where certainty disappeared beneath thousands of fallen soldiers. This time, the unanswered question is not who committed the act, but what became of the man whose death forever changed the course of English history. Low hills rise gently above the Sussex countryside, their grassy slopes appearing peaceful beneath wide, open skies. Birds circle overhead where banners once snapped in the autumn wind, and quiet footpaths now cross ground that echoed with the clash of swords, shields, and desperate cries nearly 1,000 years ago. It was here, at the Battle of Hastings on October 14, 1066, that King Harold Godwinson made his final stand against William, Duke of Normandy. The battle itself is among the most thoroughly studied events in medieval history. Yet, the fate of Harold's body remains surprisingly uncertain. For hours, Harold's army held the ridge with remarkable determination. English shield walls resisted repeated Norman assaults, forcing William's forces into costly attacks uphill. As daylight faded, however, the balance shifted. Whether through tactical deception, exhaustion, or simple attrition, the English defenses finally broke. By evening, Harold was dead, and the Norman conquest had begun. What happened afterward is far less clear. The famous Bayeux tapestry appears to show Harold struck in or near the eye by an arrow before being cut down by Norman knights. For generations, this image became the accepted account of his death. Modern historians, however, have questioned whether the tapestry truly depicts the king in that exact sequence. Some argue that the damaged embroidery and later restoration make the interpretation uncertain. Others suggest Harold may have died primarily from sword wounds during the final fighting, with the arrow becoming a symbolic addition emphasizing divine judgment rather than literal history. Even if the manner of his death remains debated, the greater mystery concerns what followed. Contemporary chroniclers agree that Harold's body proved difficult to identify among the thousands of fallen. Medieval warfare often left armor damaged beyond recognition, while wounds could make even familiar faces unrecognizable. According to several accounts, William ordered a search for the English king's remains after the battle. The question was not merely practical. Possessing Harold's body would reinforce Norman victory while preventing his grave from becoming an immediate rallying point for continued resistance. One tradition claims that Harold's companion, Edith Swanwick, was asked to identify the body because she alone recognized certain private physical features. Whether this story reflects historical memory or later legend remains uncertain. Medieval chroniclers frequently incorporated deeply personal details into their narratives, sometimes preserving genuine recollections, and sometimes adding dramatic elements that reinforce the emotional weight of an event. Another account records that Harold's mother, Geitha, offered William a substantial ransom in gold equal to her son's weight in exchange for his body. The request was supposedly refused. Some writers claimed William ordered Harold buried near the coast, declaring that the fallen king should continue guarding the shores he had defended during life. Yet, no contemporary source confirms the exact burial location with confidence. Alternative traditions soon emerged. Several medieval writers suggested that Harold was interred secretly at Waltham Abbey, a religious house closely associated with him before the Norman invasion. According to these accounts, loyal followers quietly recovered his remains and carried them to the abbey for burial with proper ceremony. Waltham itself later embraced this tradition, strengthening its identity as Harold's final resting place. Yet, archaeological evidence has never conclusively verified the claim. More intriguing still are the stories that Harold survived. Although rejected by most historians, a small number of medieval texts describe the defeated king escaping the battlefield despite severe injuries. One account portrays him living for years as a hermit, abandoning royal ambition in favor of a life devoted to prayer and repentance. Such narratives fit comfortably within medieval religious storytelling, where fallen rulers often experience dramatic spiritual transformation. Even so, they illustrate how completely uncertainty surrounded Harold's final fate. The absence of a universally accepted royal tomb only deepens the mystery. Unlike many medieval monarchs whose resting places became centers of remembrance, Harold left behind no unquestioned grave. His disappearance from the historical landscape mirrored the disappearance of Anglo-Saxon rule itself. The conquerors reshaped England's political order, language, architecture, and aristocracy. In many ways, the uncertain fate of Harold's body became a powerful symbol of a kingdom passing into a new era. Today, visitors walk across the fields of battle in Sussex, where the wind moves quietly over ground once stained by one of England's defining conflicts. Somewhere beneath that landscape, or perhaps far away in another forgotten resting place, the last Anglo-Saxon king may still lie beyond certain identification. Whether Harold Godwinson received an honored burial, a concealed grave, or became the subject of legends that outlived the truth, one mystery remains. Did the Norman conquest erase only a king, or did it also erase the final trace of where England's last native ruler came to rest? If the uncertain resting place of Harold Godwinson reminds us that even a king can vanish into the silence of history, another mystery follows the trail of a monarch whose greatest possessions may have disappeared with him. Once again, the story leads toward King John, but this time, the unanswered question reaches beyond royal regalia to an entire fortune that may still lie hidden beneath England's shifting landscape. Gray tidal waters stretch across the broad expanse of the Wash, reflecting an ever-changing sky where sea and land seem to merge without clear boundaries. At low tide, winding channels carve temporary pathways through vast mudflats, only to disappear beneath rushing water a few hours later. The landscape is deceptive, constantly reshaped by currents, storms, and centuries of sediment. Beneath its quiet surface, legend suggests that one of England's greatest lost fortunes may still remain untouched. King John spent the final months of his reign moving rapidly across a kingdom consumed by civil war. Rebel barons had challenged his authority, French forces had landed in England, and the stability of the crown hung by a fragile thread. Every journey carried political urgency. Every convoy transported supplies essential to a ruler struggling to maintain control over an increasingly divided realm. Among those possessions was a vast collection of royal wealth. The medieval crown represented only a small part of what traveled with the king. Royal treasuries often included gold and silver plate, jeweled reliquaries, ceremonial weapons, official seals, valuable documents, coins collected through taxation, and gifts received from nobles and foreign rulers. These objects were more than symbols of luxury. They embodied the administrative and financial power of the monarchy itself. In October 1216, John approached the estuary known as the Wash while traveling eastward. According to several contemporary chroniclers, part of the royal baggage train attempted a shortcut across the tidal flats during low water. The route had been used before, but it demanded precise timing and intimate knowledge of the changing tides. Something went terribly wrong. Floodwaters surged across the crossing. Heavy wagons became trapped in soft mud as horses struggled against rising currents. Carts overturned. Equipment disappeared beneath the water. Men attempting rescue were overwhelmed by the speed of the incoming tide. By the time conditions stabilized, a substantial portion of the royal convoy had reportedly vanished beneath the marshes. Only days later, King John himself died after falling ill, leaving little opportunity to organize an extensive recovery. The historical record confirms that valuable baggage was lost. Exactly what that baggage contained remains one of the central mysteries. Some chroniclers described immense quantities of treasure disappearing into the estuary, while others simply referred to the king's baggage without detailed inventories. Medieval records rarely provide complete lists of movable royal property, making it difficult to determine whether priceless regalia, financial reserves, or mostly everyday supplies were actually aboard the lost wagons. Over time, each generation expanded the possibilities, transforming an unfortunate accident into one of England's most enduring treasure legends. Historians generally agree that at least some losses occurred, but opinions differ sharply regarding their scale. One interpretation suggests later writers exaggerated the disaster, allowing the story to grow with repeated retelling. Another argues that political necessity encouraged the new government under Henry III to minimize the extent of the loss, preserving confidence in a monarchy already weakened by war and succession. The landscape itself has become part of the mystery. The coastline surrounding the Wash has changed dramatically since the 13th century. Rivers have altered their courses, marshes have migrated, and layers of silt have buried older surfaces beneath meters of sediment. Even if the treasure entered the estuary exactly as described, the original crossing may now lie far beneath deposits accumulated over 8 centuries, making precise identification extraordinarily difficult. Modern technology has occasionally revived hopes of discovery. Archaeologists, geologists, and independent researchers have examined historical maps, tidal patterns, and buried river channels in an effort to reconstruct the medieval landscape. Metal-detecting surveys and geophysical investigations have produced intriguing finds from different periods, yet none has conclusively identified the missing royal convoy. Every promising clue seems to dissolve beneath further examination, much like the shifting mud itself. Speculation naturally fills the remaining gaps. Some suggest that only a fraction of the treasure was truly lost, and that survivors quietly recovered valuable objects before official accounts were written. Others wonder whether the convoy was deliberately diverted, with the tale of the flooded crossing masking theft, political betrayal, or a carefully concealed transfer of wealth during the chaos of civil war. There is no surviving evidence strong enough to confirm these possibilities, but neither can they be dismissed entirely in the absence of definitive proof. Today, the tides continue their ancient rhythm across the Wash, covering and uncovering the same restless landscape that challenged medieval travelers centuries ago. Somewhere beneath those quiet waters, or perhaps nowhere beneath them at all, may rest the fortune of a troubled king whose reign ended in uncertainty. Whether the treasure was claimed by the sea, recovered in secret, or transformed into legend through generations of storytelling, the marshes have never revealed a final answer. And as each tide retreats, it leaves behind the same enduring question: what secrets still lie hidden beneath the shifting sands, waiting for the moment when history finally chooses to uncover them? If the tides of the Wash remind us that fortunes can disappear beneath water and mud, the next mystery leads into a different kind of concealment. Here, treasure may not have been lost by accident at all. Instead, it may have been hidden deliberately, protected by an organization whose sudden downfall remains one of medieval Europe's most dramatic reversals. Weathered stone arches rise above the quiet courtyards of the Temple district in London, where narrow lanes trace the outline of buildings that once belonged to one of the most influential military orders of the Middle Ages. Although modern life surrounds these ancient foundations, fragments of the medieval complex still survive, hinting at a time when armored knights, royal officials, merchants, and pilgrims passed through these gates every day. Beneath these stones lies a question that has endured for more than 7 centuries. What became of the English wealth of the Knights Templar? Founded in the early 12th century, the Knights Templar began as a religious order dedicated to protecting Christian pilgrims traveling through the Holy Land. Over time, however, they evolved into something far more complex. Their network of estates stretched across Europe, including England, where they owned farms, churches, workshops, and administrative centers. They also developed sophisticated financial systems that allowed nobles, monarchs, and travelers to deposit wealth in one location and withdraw it elsewhere. Long before modern banking, the Templars had become trusted custodians of immense resources. Their influence brought admiration. It also attracted powerful enemies. By the beginning of the 14th century, King Philip IV of France faced severe financial difficulties. Deeply indebted to the Templars, he launched a dramatic campaign against the order in 1307, accusing its members of heresy, blasphemy, and other serious crimes. Many historians believe these accusations were politically motivated rather than supported by convincing evidence. Under pressure from Philip, Pope Clement V eventually dissolved the order in 1312. England responded more cautiously. King Edward II initially expressed skepticism toward the accusations and hesitated before taking action against the English Templars. Eventually, however, papal authority prevailed. Templar properties were seized, members were arrested, and the order disappeared from English public life. Officially, many of its lands passed to the Knights Hospitaller, another military religious order. Yet, official records leave room for uncertainty. Inventories describe estates, buildings, and certain movable goods, but they do not always provide complete accounts of every valuable object under Templar control. If the order anticipated its suppression, could some of its most important assets have been removed before royal officials arrived? This possibility has inspired centuries of speculation. Some researchers suggest that English Templars quietly dispersed portable treasures among trusted allies, religious houses, or sympathetic noble families. Gold, silver, sacred relics, confidential documents, and financial records could have been hidden with surprising speed if advance warning existed. Given the Templars' extensive administrative network, they possessed both the organization and local knowledge to move valuable items discreetly. Others argue that the legendary treasure has been greatly exaggerated. Much of the Templars' wealth existed not as chests overflowing with gold, but as land, agricultural income, rents, and financial obligations spread across Europe. In this interpretation, there was never a single hidden fortune waiting to be discovered. Instead, the order's true wealth consisted largely of legal rights and economic systems that could not simply be buried beneath the ground. Even so, certain mysteries remain difficult to dismiss entirely. Medieval financial records occasionally reveal discrepancies between expected inventories and property later recovered by authorities. While such inconsistencies may reflect ordinary administrative confusion, they have encouraged theories that at least part of the order's movable wealth escaped confiscation. The disappearance of some archives has only added to the uncertainty. Without complete documentation, historians cannot always determine exactly what officials expected to find, or what may already have vanished. The Temple Church in London has naturally become one of the focal points for legend. Its distinctive circular design, inspired by sacred architecture in Jerusalem, has encouraged generations of visitors to imagine hidden chambers, concealed vaults, and forgotten passages beneath its foundations. Archaeological investigations have revealed fascinating details about the site's medieval development, but no confirmed cache of Templar treasure has ever emerged. Still, the enduring silence beneath those ancient stones continues to inspire curiosity. More speculative theories venture even further. Some claim that the English Templars secretly transferred their wealth to Scotland, where political circumstances may have offered greater protection. Others suggest hidden fleets carried valuables overseas before the Order's final suppression. A few legends even connect the missing treasure with the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or other sacred relics long associated with medieval tradition. These ideas remain unsupported by historical evidence, yet they illustrate how the mystery has expanded far beyond the surviving records. Today, the Temple District stands as both a historical landmark and a reminder of an institution that once wielded extraordinary influence before disappearing with remarkable speed. The buildings have changed, the knights are gone, and their official records tell only part of the story. Whether the English Templars left behind hidden wealth, concealed knowledge, or simply a legend strengthened by centuries of imagination, one possibility continues to linger beneath London's oldest stones. If every account was never written down, and every vault was never opened, how much of the Order's true legacy still waits in silence, beyond the reach of history itself? If the missing wealth of the Knights Templar reminds us that secrets can survive long after powerful institutions disappear, the next mystery shifts from hidden treasure to hidden loyalty. This time, the unanswered question concerns not what was lost, but who chose to surrender one of medieval Britain's most determined resistance leaders into enemy hands. Mist drifts slowly across the rugged hills of southern Scotland, softening the outlines of ancient forests and narrow valleys where travelers once moved cautiously between castles and isolated settlements. Weathered stone ruins overlook winding rivers, while forgotten tracks disappear into landscapes that have witnessed centuries of conflict. Somewhere among these quiet places, trust gave way to betrayal, and the fate of William Wallace took a path that history has never fully explained. By the early 14th century, Wallace had become one of the most recognizable figures in Scotland's struggle against English rule. His victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297 had transformed him from a local knight into a national leader. Although later defeated at the Battle of Falkirk in 1298, he refused to abandon the cause. While other nobles negotiated, shifted alliances, or accepted political compromise, Wallace remained committed to resisting King Edward I. Then, in August 1305, everything changed. Near Glasgow, Wallace was captured during what appears to have been a carefully planned operation. He was transported south, tried in London for treason, and executed with exceptional severity. His death was intended not only as punishment, but also as a warning to others who might continue resisting English authority. The capture itself, however, remains surrounded by uncertainty. Most traditional accounts identify Sir John Menteith as the man responsible. A Scottish noble serving as constable of Dumbarton Castle, Menteith has long occupied the role of the principal betrayer in popular memory. Medieval chronicles frequently describe Wallace being seized through Menteith's actions, and later generations often portrayed him as the embodiment of political treachery. Yet, the historical record is more complicated than the legend suggests. Serving as a royal official did not necessarily reveal who provided the critical information leading to Wallace's arrest. Menteith may have directed the operation without being the individual who revealed Wallace's location. If intelligence came from elsewhere, the identity of the true informant remains unknown. Some historians suggest Wallace's movements had become increasingly difficult to conceal. Years of conflict had reduced the number of secure places where he could travel unnoticed. Maintaining secrecy required cooperation from local landowners, sympathizers, and trusted companions. Every additional person aware of his whereabouts increased the possibility that information might reach English authorities, whether through loyalty, fear, financial reward, or political calculation. The political landscape of Scotland at the time was deeply divided. Not every Scottish noble supported Wallace's methods or objectives. Powerful families balanced competing loyalties between the English crown and the Scottish resistance, often making decisions based upon survival rather than ideology. Temporary alliances shifted rapidly, and yesterday's ally could become tomorrow's opponent. Within such an atmosphere, betrayal was not always driven by personal hatred. It could emerge from changing political realities that offered few simple choices. Another question concerns the role of rewards. English authorities had every incentive to capture Wallace alive. Financial payments, promises of protection, or restoration of confiscated lands may have encouraged cooperation from individuals willing to reveal valuable information. Medieval governments frequently relied upon networks of informants rather than large military expeditions when pursuing elusive political opponents. Yet, surviving records reveal remarkably little about who, if anyone, received such compensation in Wallace's case. Some researchers have wondered whether Wallace trusted the wrong circle during his final months. Perhaps someone close to him unknowingly disclosed his location during ordinary conversation. Perhaps an intercepted message revealed his movements. Or perhaps English intelligence had gradually assembled enough separate pieces of information that no single act of betrayal was required at all. More speculative theories have occasionally suggested wider conspiracies involving rival Scottish nobles who viewed Wallace as an obstacle to their own political ambitions. Others have imagined secret negotiations conducted long before his capture, with agreements carefully concealed from contemporary chroniclers. While such possibilities remain unsupported by firm evidence, they reflect the continuing difficulty of explaining how one of the kingdom's most experienced resistance leaders could suddenly be found after years of avoiding capture. The surviving chronicles offer clues but rarely certainty. Many were written years after the events by authors influenced by regional loyalties, political perspectives, or the expectations of their patrons. As with so many medieval mysteries, distinguishing eyewitness knowledge from later interpretation becomes increasingly difficult as the centuries pass. Today, the hills and forests where Wallace once traveled remain remarkably unchanged, their quiet landscapes offering little hint of the decisions that unfolded among them. The names of kings, battles, and castles have survived in remarkable detail, yet the identity of the person, or perhaps the network of people, who ultimately delivered Wallace into English hands remains frustratingly uncertain. Was there truly a single betrayer remembered by history, or did the capture result from a chain of quiet choices whose participants disappeared into anonymity long ago? Somewhere within those forgotten loyalties, the final answer may still remain concealed. If the capture of William Wallace reminds us how hidden motives and private decisions can alter the course of history, the next mystery unfolds within the mind of a king himself. Here, the unanswered question is neither who acted nor where something disappeared, but why a monarch repeatedly seemed to vanish from the world around him while remaining physically present. Tall Gothic windows filter pale light into the quiet halls of Windsor Castle, illuminating stone walls that have watched generations of monarchs rule, celebrate, and mourn. The chambers feel timeless, yet they also preserve the memory of long silences, moments when England looked toward its king and found no response. Behind these walls, and within other royal residences across the kingdom, Henry VI experienced episodes that left his contemporaries confused, frightened, and uncertain about the future of the crown itself. Henry VI became king in 1422, while still an infant, inheriting both the English throne and, according to English claims, the crown of France during the final phase of the 100 Years' War. His early reign unfolded under the guidance of experienced regents, but as he matured, it became increasingly apparent that Henry possessed a temperament very different from that of his warrior father, Henry V. Gentle, deeply religious, and inclined toward peace rather than conquest, he struggled to command powerful nobles whose rivalries steadily intensified. Then, in the summer of 1453, something extraordinary occurred. Without warning, Henry entered a state that baffled everyone around him. Contemporary accounts describe a king who became almost entirely unresponsive. He neither spoke nor reacted to those in his presence. Visitors reportedly received no acknowledgement, and even major political developments failed to provoke visible emotion. Perhaps the most striking episode came after the birth of his only son, Edward of Westminster. According to chroniclers, Henry showed no awareness that he had become a father until many months later, when his condition gradually began to improve. For over a year, England effectively ruled without its king. The political consequences were immediate. Richard, Duke of York, was appointed Lord Protector, assuming many royal responsibilities while factions within the nobility competed for influence. Historians often view this period as one of the crucial developments leading toward the Wars of the Roses, demonstrating how the health of a single individual could destabilize an entire kingdom. But what caused Henry's collapse? Modern historians and medical researchers have proposed several possibilities, though no diagnosis can ever be confirmed with certainty. One widely discussed explanation points toward a hereditary psychiatric condition. Henry's maternal grandfather, Charles VI of France, suffered from severe episodes of mental illness throughout his reign. Charles sometimes failed to recognize members of his own family, believed he was made of glass, or wandered in profoundly altered states of awareness. Because Henry shared this bloodline, some researchers have suggested that a hereditary disorder may have passed through the royal family. Others believe the intense pressures of kingship may have contributed significantly. By 1453, England had suffered devastating military setbacks in France, including the loss of nearly all territories won during earlier campaigns. Political tensions at court had reached dangerous levels, while financial difficulties and noble rivalries created constant instability. Could prolonged emotional strain have triggered an already vulnerable mind? Medieval chroniclers lacked the language of modern psychology, making it difficult to distinguish between inherited illness, neurological conditions, or responses to overwhelming stress. Another possibility involves physical disease. Some scholars have explored whether infections, metabolic disorders, neurological injuries, or other medical conditions could explain Henry's prolonged periods of withdrawal. The surviving descriptions suggest symptoms that overlap with several modern diagnoses, yet they remain frustratingly incomplete. Medieval observers naturally focused on visible behavior rather than the clinical details that physicians would seek today. Religious interpretations dominated many contemporary explanations. Henry's profound piety shaped both his own worldview and that of those around him. Some believed his condition reflected divine testing or heavenly judgment during a period of national turmoil. Others interpreted his silence as evidence of extraordinary spiritual contemplation rather than illness alone. In a deeply religious society, the boundary between physical sickness and spiritual experience was often understood very differently from modern medical perspectives. The mystery deepens because Henry eventually recovered, at least partially. He resumed many royal duties, only to experience further periods of instability in later years. This pattern has encouraged speculation that his condition followed a recurring cycle rather than resulting from a single catastrophic event. Yet, the exact nature of those cycles remains impossible to reconstruct from surviving evidence. The political impact proved lasting. As confidence in Henry's ability to govern weakened, rival noble houses became increasingly willing to challenge one another by force. Whether his illness directly caused the Wars of the Roses or merely accelerated conflicts already unfolding continues to be debated. What is certain is that England's future became inseparably linked to the mysterious decline of one remarkably gentle king. Today, the castles where Henry once lived still stand in quiet dignity, their stone corridors echoing with centuries of royal footsteps. Yet, among the countless decisions recorded in medieval chronicles, some of the most important may have been shaped by moments when the king himself seemed unable to respond at all. Was Henry VI the victim of an inherited condition centuries ahead of medical understanding, a ruler overwhelmed by impossible burdens, or someone experiencing an illness that modern history has still not fully recognized? Within that silence, one of medieval England's most profound mysteries continues to endure. If Henry VI's unexplained periods of silence remind us that history sometimes conceals its greatest mysteries within the mind of a king, the next story leads us into a fortress where silence took another form entirely. Here, the unanswered question concerns a prisoner whose true identity may have been hidden as carefully as the walls that confined him. The ruins of Pontefract Castle rise above the Yorkshire landscape, their fractured towers overlooking fields that have changed little since the Middle Ages. Wind moves through broken archways where royal banners once hung, while deep underground chambers remain cool and shadowed even on the brightest days. Few English fortresses witnessed more political intrigue than Pontefract. Kings were imprisoned here. Noble families negotiated alliances within its halls, and rumors flourished behind walls built to keep both prisoners and secrets from the outside world. Among those secrets is the story of an unidentified man whose imprisonment has puzzled historians for generations. Pontefract Castle earned a reputation as one of the crown's most secure strongholds. Because of its formidable defenses and strategic location, it frequently housed prisoners considered too important or too dangerous to be kept elsewhere. Many captives were well documented. Others appeared only briefly in scattered records before disappearing once again into silence. One mysterious reference has drawn particular attention. Several later traditions describe an unknown prisoner held under extraordinary secrecy within Pontefract. Unlike ordinary captives, this individual was reportedly isolated, carefully guarded, and rarely mentioned by name. The surviving accounts are frustratingly vague, offering little more than hints that someone of exceptional importance spent years behind the castle's walls. If the reports preserve genuine historical memory, they raise an immediate question. Why conceal a prisoner's identity unless revealing it posed a political risk? One possibility connects the mystery to the turbulent years of the Wars of the Roses. Throughout the 15th century, rival branches of the royal family competed relentlessly for the English throne. Princes, noble heirs, and potential claimants frequently disappeared into castles, monasteries, or private estates whenever their existence threatened those already in power. In such an atmosphere, concealing the survival of a politically sensitive prisoner might have prevented rebellion, protected fragile alliances, or eliminated competing claims without the consequences of a public execution. Some historians have wondered whether the unidentified captive could have been linked to the House of York or the House of Lancaster. Medieval governments often found imprisonment more politically useful than immediate execution. A living rival held in secret could be controlled. A publicly executed rival might become a martyr capable of inspiring resistance for generations. Naturally, speculation has extended toward some of England's most famous missing figures. Occasionally, theories have suggested connections with one of the princes in the Tower, whose uncertain fate has encouraged countless alternative narratives. Could one of the brothers have survived while being quietly transferred to a distant fortress such as Pontefract? Most historians consider this unlikely, pointing out the absence of contemporary evidence placing either prince there. Even so, the mystery surrounding their disappearance has encouraged later writers to associate almost any unidentified royal prisoner with their story. Another possibility involves lesser-known claimants whose names gradually faded from official history. Medieval England produced numerous individuals with distant hereditary claims to noble titles or royal bloodlines. Some disappeared from surviving records after political upheavals, leaving historians uncertain whether they died, entered religious life, or simply vanished into prolonged captivity. The surviving documentation creates as many questions as it answers. Many medieval administrative records have been lost through war, fire, neglect, or the simple passage of time. Pontefract itself suffered extensive destruction during the English Civil War centuries later, taking with it countless documents that might once have clarified earlier events. Historians therefore rely upon scattered chronicles, financial accounts, legal references, and later traditions that often contradict one another or omit crucial details. Some researchers argue that the mystery has grown larger than the evidence deserves. They suggest the unidentified prisoner may have been a noble hostage whose name disappeared simply because surviving records are incomplete. In this interpretation, later generations transformed ordinary administrative gaps into dramatic legends about hidden princes and forgotten heirs. Others remain less certain. Royal governments occasionally concealed politically sensitive prisoners with remarkable effectiveness. Across medieval Europe, there are documented examples of captives whose identities were deliberately obscured for years to prevent unrest. If such methods were employed elsewhere, it would hardly be impossible for similar secrecy to have surrounded an important prisoner at Pontefract. More speculative theories venture even further, proposing concealed tunnels, undiscovered prison chambers, or sealed archives waiting beneath the ruined castle. Archaeological investigations have revealed much about Pontefract's construction, but they have not uncovered evidence confirming these imaginative claims. Still, the fortress continues to surrender new details about its long history whenever careful excavation explores forgotten corners of the site. Today, visitors wander among the weathered remains, where broken walls stand beneath open skies that reveal little of what once occurred inside. The names of many prisoners have survived in royal records, yet one shadowy figure continues to linger just beyond certainty. Whether the mysterious captive was a forgotten noble, a concealed claimant to the throne, or simply an ordinary prisoner transformed by centuries of storytelling, the silence surrounding his identity remains remarkably complete. And perhaps somewhere beneath the fallen stones of Pontefract Castle, the final clue still lies hidden, waiting for history to recognize the name that was never meant to be remembered. If the unknown prisoner of Pontefract Castle reminds us that a single hidden identity can survive for centuries without resolution, the next mystery leaves behind no forgotten cell or sealed chamber. Instead, it survives in ink upon parchment, where an extraordinary voice continues to speak, while the name behind that voice remains forever absent. Faded parchment rests beneath carefully controlled light, its dark ink still remarkably clear despite the passing of more than 600 years. Delicate Gothic lettering flows across each page with rhythmic precision, while colorful initials mark the beginning of verses that have outlived kingdoms, dynasties, and generations of readers. Preserved today within a single medieval manuscript, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight remains one of the greatest achievements of Middle English literature. Yet, the identity of the person who composed it has never been discovered. The poem emerged during the late 14th century, an era shaped by political upheaval, plague, religious debate, and social transformation. While Geoffrey Chaucer's name became firmly attached to his literary works, the creator of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight left no signature, no personal introduction, and no surviving record identifying the author. The manuscript itself offers no direct clue beyond the remarkable skill evident on every page. That silence has inspired centuries of investigation. The poem tells the story of Sir Gawain, one of King Arthur's most respected knights, who accepts an extraordinary challenge from the mysterious Green Knight during a Christmas feast at Camelot. At first glance, the narrative appears to belong entirely within the world of medieval romance. Yet, beneath its adventure lies an intricate exploration of honor, temptation, faith, courage, and the limits of human perfection. Its language is richly descriptive, its symbolism remarkably sophisticated, and its understanding of courtly life strikingly confident. Whoever wrote it possessed exceptional talent. Linguistic analysis provides one of the strongest starting points. The poem is written in a distinctive northwestern dialect of Middle English, suggesting that its author likely lived somewhere in the region stretching across parts of Cheshire, Staffordshire, Lancashire, or neighboring counties. Vocabulary, spelling, and grammatical patterns all point toward this area with surprising consistency. Even so, language alone cannot identify an individual. The surviving manuscript contains 3 additional works: Pearl, Patience, and Cleanness. Because all 4 texts appear together and display notable similarities in vocabulary, poetic technique, and religious thought, most scholars believe they were composed by the same anonymous writer. As a result, historians often refer to the unknown author simply as the Pearl Poet or the Gawain Poet, practical names that acknowledge literary unity without claiming personal identity. The author's education presents another intriguing puzzle. The poem reveals extensive familiarity with theology, scripture, aristocratic customs, hunting practices, heraldry, and the natural landscape of northwestern England. Such knowledge has led some researchers to suggest that the writer belonged to the clergy, where advanced education was more readily available. Others believe the author may have served within a noble household, gaining first-hand experience of courtly ceremonies and aristocratic culture, while also receiving an unusually broad education. Neither possibility answers every question. The work combines profound religious reflection with vivid descriptions of forests, castles, armor, and noble entertainments. Its author appears equally comfortable discussing spiritual symbolism and the practical details of medieval hunting expeditions. Was this the achievement of a highly educated priest with close aristocratic connections, or a courtly scholar whose religious learning rivaled that of churchmen? Over the centuries, numerous names have been proposed. A few historians have attempted to identify the poet with known medieval clerics or regional administrators whose education matched the work's sophistication. Others have suggested forgotten members of noble households who may have written privately without seeking public recognition. None of these candidates has gained widespread acceptance. Every proposed identity eventually encounters gaps in chronology, geography, or documentary evidence too significant to ignore. More imaginative theories naturally followed. Some have speculated that the anonymity itself was deliberate, allowing the poem's moral message to stand above individual reputation. Others have wondered whether the manuscript preserves only a copy of an even older work whose original creator had already been forgotten. While these ideas remain speculative, they reflect the remarkable endurance of a mystery built not upon missing treasure or concealed prisoners, but upon extraordinary creativity without a known creator. The manuscript's survival adds another layer of fortune. Countless medieval texts disappeared through war, neglect, fire, and the dissolution of libraries. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight survives today in only one known manuscript. Had that single volume been lost, both the poem and its mystery might have vanished forever. Today, readers continue to admire the elegance of its language and the depth of its imagination, hearing the unmistakable voice of a gifted medieval writer whose name has dissolved into history. Every carefully chosen word remains, while the individual who arranged them has become almost invisible behind the work itself. Perhaps that anonymity was accidental, or perhaps it was the author's final and most enduring secret. After centuries of scholarship, one question still lingers between the faded lines of parchment. Who was the remarkable mind that gave life to the Green Knight, then quietly stepped out of history without leaving a name behind? If the anonymous poet of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight reminds us that remarkable voices can survive while the names behind them disappear, the next mystery asks an even broader question. What happens when it is not a single author who is forgotten, but the written memory of an entire kingdom? The scent of aged parchment lingers within the quiet reading rooms of medieval libraries, where faded manuscripts rest beneath protective glass. Their fragile pages carry the weight of centuries, preserving fragments of kings' commands, land grants, diplomatic agreements, and the daily machinery of government. Yet, every surviving document also points towards something far larger that has been lost. Somewhere beyond these scattered records once existed the royal archives of Anglo-Saxon England, a collection that, if preserved, might have transformed our understanding of the nation's earliest history. Long before the Norman conquest, Anglo-Saxon kings governed through written charters, legal codes, royal correspondence, and administrative records. Monasteries copied laws, scribes recorded grants of land, and royal officials produced documents confirming privileges, taxes, and political decisions. Literacy among the governing elite was limited compared with later centuries, making every written record especially valuable. Documents were not simply sources of information. They represented legal authority itself. Yet, remarkably little survives. Historians possess hundreds of Anglo-Saxon charters, portions of legal codes, chronicles such as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and scattered letters preserved in monasteries or cathedral collections. These are invaluable sources, but they appear to represent only a small fraction of what must once have existed. The royal government of England functioned for centuries. It almost certainly generated thousands of additional records that have simply vanished. Where did they go? The Norman conquest of 1066 immediately becomes one possible explanation. William the Conqueror introduced a new ruling elite, new administrative practices, and a new language of government. Latin gradually replaced Old English in many official contexts, while Norman nobles assumed control over estates previously managed by Anglo-Saxon aristocrats. During this profound political transformation, older records may have been discarded because they no longer served immediate legal or administrative purposes. But complete destruction seems unlikely. William relied upon existing systems of taxation, landholding, and governance far more than is sometimes assumed. The creation of the Domesday Book in 1086 demonstrates a sophisticated interest in property, ownership, and earlier obligations. Could Norman officials really have ignored every useful document inherited from the previous kingdom? Or were at least some archives carefully preserved before later disappearing through other circumstances? Fire presents another possibility. Medieval buildings, particularly those constructed largely from timber, remained constantly vulnerable to accidental destruction. Royal residences shifted frequently from one location to another, carrying documents between palaces, monasteries, and administrative centers. A single major fire could erase decades of records in only a few hours. Similar losses occurred repeatedly throughout medieval Europe, where archives often disappeared long before historians recognized their future significance. War added another layer of vulnerability. The Viking invasions of the 9th and 10th centuries devastated monasteries that served not only as religious institutions, but also as centers of literacy and record-keeping. Later conflicts, including internal rebellions and regional warfare, undoubtedly destroyed additional collections. Even peaceful neglect could prove equally damaging. Damp conditions, insects, mold, and the gradual decay of parchment steadily consumed documents that were no longer actively copied or consulted. Some historians believe the archives never existed as one centralized collection. Instead, royal records may have been distributed among monasteries, episcopal centers, and regional estates, reducing the likelihood that a single catastrophic event eliminated everything at once. In this interpretation, the disappearance occurred gradually over centuries, rather than through one dramatic moment of destruction. Even so, certain absences remain difficult to explain. Entire periods of Anglo-Saxon political history appear surprisingly underdocumented despite the complexity of the kingdom's administration. Royal correspondence with foreign rulers, detailed financial accounts, military planning, and countless legal decisions that must once have existed are almost entirely absent from the surviving record. Their disappearance leaves historians reconstructing major events from isolated references rather than comprehensive evidence. This uncertainty has encouraged more speculative ideas. Some have wondered whether sensitive documents were deliberately destroyed after the Norman conquest to strengthen the legitimacy of the new regime. Eliminating records supporting competing claims to land, titles, or royal authority could have reduced future disputes. Others imagine that forgotten archives still lie concealed within the foundations of dissolved monasteries, sealed inside undiscovered chambers, or buried beneath layers of later construction. While no convincing evidence currently supports these possibilities, occasional archaeological discoveries of hidden manuscript collections remind historians that remarkable finds remain possible. Every newly uncovered fragment has the potential to reshape familiar narratives. A single charter can redefine a king's authority over distant territories. A forgotten letter can illuminate relationships between rulers long thought understood. An overlooked manuscript can challenge assumptions that have stood for generations. The missing archives therefore represent more than lost documents. They represent countless voices that once described England in their own words before falling into silence. Today, the surviving manuscripts preserved in libraries across Britain appear less like complete histories than isolated survivors from a much greater collection. They offer glimpses rather than full accounts, echoes rather than complete conversations. Somewhere between conquest, fire, neglect, and the relentless passage of time, much of Anglo-Saxon England's written memory disappeared. Whether those records were destroyed forever, or whether fragments still wait unnoticed among forgotten shelves or beneath ancient foundations, remains one of medieval England's quietest and perhaps most profound historical mysteries. If the disappearance of the Anglo-Saxon royal archives reminds us how easily entire chapters of history can fade into silence, the next mystery follows a man who may have achieved something even rarer. While kingdoms lost their records and dynasties lost their crowns, one rebel may have slipped beyond the reach of both history and his enemies, leaving behind a story balanced between fact and legend. Morning mist drifts across the reed-filled waterways of the fens, where narrow channels weave through marshland that once stretched for miles across eastern England. Even today, the landscape feels elusive. Water reflects the sky so perfectly that solid ground seems to dissolve into the horizon, while hidden islands emerge only to disappear behind curtains of fog. In the 11th century, these wetlands formed one of the most formidable natural strongholds in Britain. It was here that Hereward the Wake made his final stand against the Norman conquerors, and perhaps vanished forever. Following William the Conqueror's victory at Hastings in 1066, Norman authority spread steadily across England. Castles rose where Anglo-Saxon strongholds once stood, lands changed hands, and resistance gradually weakened. Yet, not every English noble accepted the new order. Among the last, and most determined opponents was Hereward, remembered as a skilled warrior who organized resistance from the marshes surrounding the Isle of Ely. The fens offered more than protection. They were a labyrinth. Only those familiar with the hidden causeways and shifting waterways could move confidently through the marshes. Norman cavalry, so effective on open ground, struggled in this uncertain landscape. Local knowledge became as valuable as armor, allowing small groups of defenders to frustrate much larger forces. Contemporary chroniclers describe Hereward leading daring raids, striking unexpectedly before disappearing once again into the wetlands. For a time, the strategy worked. The Isle of Ely became one of the final centers of organized Anglo-Saxon resistance. Rebels, displaced nobles, and monks gathered there, hoping the marshes would preserve the last remnants of English independence. William eventually committed substantial resources to ending the rebellion, reportedly constructing elevated causeways and employing local guides to penetrate terrain that had long protected the defenders. Eventually, Ely fell. What happened to Hereward afterward is where certainty begins to fade. Some medieval accounts suggest he escaped before the final Norman assault. Others imply he fought until resistance collapsed, only to disappear from reliable historical records almost immediately afterward. Unlike many defeated leaders, Hereward left behind no clearly documented execution, imprisonment, or confirmed burial. His story simply continues without a definite ending. The earliest sources already disagree. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle mentions the rebellion but says remarkably little about Hereward's ultimate fate. Later texts, including the 12th century Gesta Herewardi, provide much richer narratives filled with daring escapes, secret journeys, and remarkable adventures. Yet, these accounts were written decades after the events, blending historical memory with storytelling traditions that celebrated heroic resistance. According to one version, Hereward successfully escaped Norman forces and eventually reached an agreement with William the Conqueror. Rather than dying in battle, he supposedly regained some of his lands and lived quietly under Norman rule. If true, such an ending would reflect William's occasional willingness to reconcile with former enemies whose continued resistance no longer posed a serious threat. Another tradition tells a very different story. It suggests that Hereward remained an outlaw, continuing to evade capture while living among trusted supporters hidden within the marshes. In this telling, he became less a conventional nobleman than a legendary fugitive whose intimate knowledge of the fens allowed him to outwit every attempt to seize him. Over time, this version transformed Hereward into a folk hero, admired for preserving Anglo-Saxon defiance long after organized resistance had collapsed. Historians generally approach these later stories with caution. The Gesta Herewardi contains valuable historical material, but it also displays many characteristics of medieval heroic literature. Dramatic duels, clever disguises, miraculous escapes, and larger-than-life adventures appear throughout the narrative. Distinguishing authentic memories from literary embellishment remains one of the greatest challenges in studying Hereward's life. Even so, the absence of a confirmed ending remains striking. William's administration usually recorded the fate of significant political opponents with reasonable care. Executions, confiscations of land, and acts of submission often appeared in official documents or contemporary chronicles. The lack of comparable certainty surrounding Hereward has encouraged generations of historians to ask whether the Normans themselves simply lost track of one of their most elusive enemies. More speculative theories naturally emerged over the centuries. Some suggest Hereward escaped abroad, joining other displaced Anglo-Saxon nobles on the European continent. Others imagine that he adopted a new identity, quietly abandoning politics while preserving his freedom. A few local traditions even claim his descendants lived anonymously in eastern England, carrying forward stories that gradually blended family memory with legend. None of these ideas can be verified, yet neither can they be dismissed entirely in the absence of conclusive evidence. Today, the fens remain quieter than they were nearly 1,000 years ago, but the landscape still possesses the same deceptive beauty that once frustrated invading armies. Hidden waterways continue to wind through reeds and open skies, preserving an atmosphere where disappearance seems entirely possible. Whether Hereward the Wake died as a defeated rebel, lived on through reconciliation, or escaped into anonymity beyond the reach of Norman justice, his final chapter remains unwritten, and perhaps somewhere within the mist-covered marshes, history still waits for the clue that will reveal whether England's last great Anglo-Saxon outlaw truly slipped away forever. If Hereward the Wake's uncertain fate reminds us that a determined individual can disappear into the landscape and leave history searching for answers, the next mystery unfolds not in marshes or forests, but within the halls of royal power. Here, the question is whether a woman truly practiced forbidden magic, or whether accusations of witchcraft concealed a far more political purpose. Cold stone corridors wind through the remains of medieval castles, where narrow windows admit only thin shafts of light into chambers once occupied by England's highest-ranking nobles. The silence feels heavy, as though every wall remembers whispered conversations that were never meant to leave the room. In the 15th century, these corridors became the setting for one of England's most remarkable political scandals, when Eleanor Cobham, Duchess of Gloucester, was accused of sorcery, conspiracy, and attempting to foresee the death of a king. The charges would destroy her reputation. Whether they revealed the truth remains far less certain. Eleanor Cobham occupied one of the most influential positions in England. She was the wife of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, the younger brother of Henry V, and uncle to the young King Henry VI. Humphrey himself was an important political figure, often viewed as a protector of royal authority during Henry's minority. Although his influence fluctuated over time, he remained closely connected to the succession and stood near the center of English politics. That prominence naturally attracted rivals. By the early 1440s, tensions within the royal court had intensified. Powerful noble families competed for influence over the gentle and increasingly dependent Henry VI. Alliances shifted constantly while accusations and rumors became valuable political weapons. It was within this atmosphere that suspicion began to gather around Eleanor. In 1441, authorities arrested several individuals associated with her household, including astrologer Thomas Southwell, cleric Roger Bolingbroke, and a woman named Marjorie Germain, who had long carried a reputation for practicing folk magic. Investigators claimed that the group had consulted astrological charts and performed rituals intended to predict the king's future and perhaps even hasten his death. The allegations were extraordinary. According to official proceedings, Bolingbroke had cast horoscopes concerning Henry VI, while Germain was accused of participating in magical ceremonies. Eleanor herself eventually confessed to seeking astrological guidance, though she denied intending harm against the king. Whether that confession reflected genuine admission, legal pressure, or political necessity remains impossible to determine. The distinction between astrology and witchcraft complicates the story. In the 15th century, astrology occupied an uncertain place within European society. Learned scholars, physicians, and even rulers frequently consulted astronomical calculations when making decisions about medicine, agriculture, or state affairs. While certain forms of divination attracted suspicion, not every astrological practice was automatically considered criminal. The line separating accepted scholarship from forbidden magic could shift depending upon circumstance, and perhaps depending upon who was being investigated. Many historians therefore question whether Eleanor became the victim of something larger than supernatural fear. One interpretation suggests the accusations formed part of a carefully organized effort to weaken her husband. Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, had accumulated powerful enemies among England's political elite, particularly those favoring different approaches to government and foreign policy. Disgracing Eleanor would inevitably damage Humphrey's position without directly confronting him. The scandal isolated one of the kingdom's most prominent families at a moment when political rivalries were becoming increasingly dangerous. The consequences were severe. Eleanor was forced to perform public penance, walking barefoot through the streets of London while carrying a candle before large crowds. She was then imprisoned for the remainder of her life, transferred between several castles under close supervision. Marjorie Germain was executed, while Bolingbroke also faced death following his conviction. Humphrey's political influence declined sharply, and only a few years later he himself died under circumstances that have inspired another enduring historical mystery. Yet certain details continue to resist simple explanation. Some surviving records suggest that astrological consultations genuinely occurred. If so, were they harmless attempts to glimpse the future, as many nobles of the period occasionally pursued, or did they involve intentions viewed as genuinely dangerous by contemporaries? Medieval beliefs about celestial influence differed profoundly from modern scientific understanding, making it difficult to judge such actions through present-day assumptions. More speculative interpretations have naturally emerged over the centuries. Some writers have imagined secret occult circles operating within the English court, exchanging forbidden knowledge beneath the appearance of respectable scholarship. Others have suggested that every alleged ritual was fabricated after the fact, transforming ordinary political consultations into evidence of dark conspiracy. No surviving evidence decisively confirms either possibility, but both reflect the uncertainty created by incomplete records and deeply partisan contemporary accounts. Today, Eleanor Cobham's story survives at the intersection of politics, belief, and reputation. Her name appears in chronicles as a disgraced duchess, a convicted conspirator, a possible victim of court intrigue, and, in later legend, a woman forever associated with witchcraft. The documents preserve accusations, confessions, and punishments, yet they reveal remarkably little about what truly happened behind the closed doors where these events began. Was Eleanor Cobham genuinely drawn toward forbidden practices, or did the charge of witchcraft become the most effective way to remove a powerful woman from England's political stage? Somewhere between medieval fear and political ambition, the answer may still remain concealed. If Eleanor Cobham's fall reminds us that accusations of witchcraft could conceal deeper political struggles, the next mystery turns to a death that changed the royal succession itself. Here, the question is not whether dark arts were truly involved, but whether the sudden loss of a healthy young prince was merely a tragic illness, or something far less easily explained. Candles flicker against the stone walls of Windsor Castle, their light reflecting from polished armor and richly woven tapestries. In the royal apartments, attendants move quietly through corridors that once echoed with the laughter of children raised to inherit a kingdom. Among them was Prince Alphonso, Earl of Chester, the eldest son of King Edward I and Queen Eleanor of Castile. For 13 years, he stood at the center of England's future, a child whose education, alliances, and ceremonies were carefully shaped around the expectation that he would one day become king. Then, in August 1284, the future disappeared. Prince Alphonso died suddenly at Windsor, only a few weeks before his 14th birthday. The surviving records confirm the date and place of his death, but they offer remarkably little detail about what actually happened. No clear description of symptoms survives, no physician's report explains the cause, and no contemporary chronicle provides the kind of medical narrative historians would desperately like to possess. The silence is striking, Alphonso had not been a frail child hidden from public view. He was active, politically significant, and already involved in the ceremonial life of the court. His marriage had been arranged with Margaret of Holland, linking the English crown to important continental alliances. Nothing in the surviving evidence suggests that his death had been expected. For Edward I and Eleanor, the loss was devastating. The king was known for his emotional restraint, yet records indicate genuine grief. Queen Eleanor's household accounts reveal memorial payments and religious observances connected with her son's death. The prince was buried with full royal honors at Westminster Abbey, where his tomb can still be seen today, a reminder of a succession that never came to pass. The most likely explanation is also the simplest: disease. Medieval courts were constantly exposed to infectious illnesses. Even the wealthiest households could do little against sudden fevers, respiratory infections, or gastrointestinal diseases that might become fatal within days. Historians generally regard an acute illness as the most probable cause of Alphonso's death, especially given the absence of contemporary accusations of foul play. Yet, the lack of detail has left room for questions. Why do the sources say so little? Was the illness so ordinary that chroniclers saw no need to describe it? Or were the circumstances considered too sensitive for public discussion? Medieval writers often recorded eclipses, comets, and unusual weather with great enthusiasm. Yet the death of the heir to the throne received surprisingly restrained treatment. Later generations began to notice the coincidence that followed almost immediately afterward. Just months before Alphonso died, his younger brother had been born at Caernarfon in Wales. That child would become Edward II. Had Alphonso lived, English history might have taken a very different course. The political crises, military failures, and eventual deposition associated with Edward II would never have occurred in the same way. This retrospective significance has encouraged more speculative theories. Some have wondered whether the prince could have been poisoned, perhaps by factions hoping to influence the succession. Medieval courts were certainly places of rivalry, and poisoning was a fear that appeared frequently in both rumor and literature. However, no contemporary evidence supports such an accusation in Alphonso's case. Unlike many later royal deaths, there were no recorded investigations, no named suspects, and no surviving claims from political opponents suggesting murder. Others have looked for environmental causes: contaminated food, tainted water, or an undiagnosed epidemic moving quietly through the royal household. Because medical knowledge was limited, a sudden death that seemed mysterious to contemporaries might have had a perfectly natural explanation that simply went unrecognized. One curious detail continues to attract attention. Alphonso's personal seal and documents show a boy already being prepared for adult kingship, exercising authority in limited ways and developing relationships with leading nobles. His death did not merely remove a child from the royal family, it erased a political future that had already begun to take shape. Today, visitors to Westminster Abbey can stand before the tomb of Prince Alphonso, Earl of Chester, and read the inscription commemorating a prince who was expected to rule but never did. The stone preserves his name, his lineage, and the certainty that he died young. It does not preserve the reason. Was his death the result of a sudden natural illness, a hidden medical condition, or circumstances that contemporaries chose not to record? More than 700 years later, the quiet space around his tomb still seems to hold a question that medieval England never fully answered. If the unexplained death of Prince Alphonso reminds us how the loss of a single heir can redirect the course of history, the next mystery carries that idea into the dawn of the Tudor age. Once again, a young prince died unexpectedly, and almost immediately whispers began to ask whether illness alone could truly explain such a consequential tragedy. The stone walls of Ludlow Castle stand quietly above the River Teme, their weathered towers overlooking the rolling countryside of the Welsh Marches. Within these chambers, royal banners once fluttered in celebration as England's future king prepared to begin his adult life. Richly furnished apartments, ceremonial halls, and private chapels reflected the confidence of a dynasty that had only recently secured its place upon the throne. Yet, within a matter of months, those same rooms became the setting for one of the Tudor era's earliest and most enduring mysteries. Prince Arthur Tudor, the eldest son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, represented the future of the new Tudor dynasty. Born in 1486, shortly after his father's victory at the Battle of Bosworth, Arthur's very name evoked the legendary King Arthur, symbolizing hopes of stability after decades of civil conflict. Every aspect of his upbringing reflected his expected destiny as England's next monarch. In 1501, Arthur married Catherine of Aragon in a magnificent ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral. The marriage strengthened England's alliance with Spain, then one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. Soon afterward, the young couple traveled to Ludlow Castle, where Arthur began exercising authority as Prince of Wales. Only a few months later, disaster struck. In the spring of 1502, both Arthur and Catherine fell seriously ill. Catherine survived. Arthur did not. He died at just 15 years of age. Contemporary records usually describe the illness only in general terms. Later, writers often referred to it as the sweating sickness, although many historians caution that this diagnosis cannot be confirmed. Others have suggested tuberculosis, influenza, plague, or another infectious disease common in medieval and early Tudor England. Without detailed medical descriptions, modern physicians can only speculate about the true cause. Yet, almost from the beginning, another possibility emerged. Had Arthur been poisoned? The theory owes much to the enormous political consequences of his death. Arthur was not simply a prince. He was the carefully prepared successor upon whom the Tudor future depended. His sudden loss transformed the line of succession overnight. His younger brother, Henry, unexpectedly became heir to the throne. Years later, that younger brother would reign as Henry VIII, fundamentally reshaping English politics, religion, and European diplomacy. Such dramatic consequences naturally encouraged suspicion. Could someone have benefited from Arthur's death? Some later writers pointed toward foreign rivals who might have wished to weaken the Anglo-Spanish alliance. Others imagined domestic opponents of the Tudor dynasty, still loyal to rival claimants after the Wars of the Roses. A few even suggested ambitious individuals within the royal court, hoping to influence the future succession. The historical evidence, however, remains remarkably thin. No contemporary investigation accused anyone of poisoning Arthur. No royal inquiry identified suspicious food, drink, or servants. No surviving diplomatic correspondence records widespread belief that murder had occurred. Given Henry VII's reputation as a cautious and highly organized ruler, historians generally believed that convincing evidence of deliberate poisoning would almost certainly have prompted an extensive investigation. The illness itself also appears significant. Catherine of Aragon became seriously sick during the same outbreak, although she recovered. This detail strongly supports the possibility of an infectious disease affecting multiple members of the household, rather than poison aimed specifically at Arthur. Epidemics frequently swept through castles and royal residences, where close living conditions allowed illnesses to spread rapidly despite wealth and careful attention. Even so, uncertainty persists. Medical knowledge in the early 16th century remained limited. Physicians described symptoms according to theories of bodily humors rather than modern pathology, and detailed clinical observations were rarely preserved. A disease that seems mysterious today may have appeared entirely ordinary to contemporaries, or the opposite may have been true. Some researchers have explored whether Arthur may have suffered from an underlying medical condition that left him especially vulnerable to infection. Others wonder whether the physical demands of constant travel, ceremonial obligations, and the unfamiliar climate of Ludlow weakened his health during a particularly dangerous season. None of these explanations can be demonstrated conclusively. More speculative theories continue to circulate in popular history. Some imagine elaborate conspiracies within European courts, while others suggest that politically sensitive information was deliberately concealed to preserve confidence in the young Tudor dynasty. These ideas remain unsupported by reliable contemporary evidence, yet they reflect the fascination surrounding a death that altered the destiny of England more profoundly than almost any other. Arthur's passing reshaped history in ways no one at Ludlow could have anticipated. Catherine of Aragon eventually married Henry VIII, a decision that would contribute to England's break with Rome and transform the religious landscape of the kingdom. Had Arthur survived, those events might never have unfolded in the same way. Today, the quiet halls of Ludlow Castle preserve few clues about the prince's final days. Stone walls that witnessed his illness reveal nothing about its cause, while surviving documents leave historians balancing probability against possibility. Was Prince Arthur simply another victim of the deadly diseases that so often haunted the medieval world? Or did darker forces play a hidden role in the fall of England's first Tudor heir? After more than 5 centuries, the silence surrounding his final illness continues to invite the same unanswered question. If the mysterious death of Prince Arthur Tudor reminds us how a single unanswered question can reshape the destiny of a kingdom, the next mystery asks us to examine an object that seems to resist understanding altogether. Here, the uncertainty is not about a forgotten death or a hidden crime, but about a manuscript whose language, purpose, and perhaps even homeland remain unknown. Soft light falls across brittle sheets of vellum covered in graceful, flowing symbols unlike any familiar alphabet. Delicate illustrations fill the margins, strange plants that resemble no known species, circular diagrams crowded with stars, intricate mechanical patterns, and mysterious figures bathing in interconnected pools of green water. Every page appears carefully planned, yet every attempt to read its text has met the same silent barrier. This is the Voynich Manuscript, one of the world's most famous undeciphered books, and among its many mysteries is a question that has quietly drawn increasing attention. Could its origins lie, at least in part, within medieval England? Radiocarbon dating has placed the manuscript's vellum in the early 15th century, making it a genuine medieval artifact rather than a later forgery. Its illustrations suggest knowledge of botany, astronomy, medicine, and natural philosophy, although none of these subjects appear in forms easily recognized today. Most remarkable of all is the writing itself. Thousands of words repeat with consistent patterns, following statistical rules that resemble genuine language more closely than random invention, yet no one has successfully read it. For generations, scholars searched across continental Europe for its birthplace. Northern Italy, Bohemia, Germany, and southern France have all been proposed as possible places of origin. More recently, however, some historians have begun examining another possibility, one connected to England's vibrant intellectual world during the late Middle Ages. The idea is not without foundation. England possessed important centers of learning at Oxford and Cambridge, where scholars studied astronomy, medicine, mathematics, theology, and classical philosophy. Monasteries and noble households preserved substantial libraries, while educated clerics frequently corresponded with colleagues across Europe. A manuscript blending scientific observation with unusual symbolism would not have been entirely out of place within these circles. Attention often turns toward one remarkable figure: Roger Bacon, the 13th century English Franciscan friar, became associated with the Voynich manuscript long after his death. Bacon earned a reputation for studying optics, languages, mathematics, and experimental observation, leading later generations to imagine him as the ideal creator of such an enigmatic work. During the 17th century, some owners of the manuscript even believed Bacon had written it. Modern scholarship largely rejects that conclusion. Radiocarbon dating demonstrates that the vellum was produced more than a century after Bacon's lifetime. Even so, the persistence of his association illustrates how naturally the manuscript seemed to fit England's tradition of learned inquiry. If Bacon was not its author, could later English scholars have inherited aspects of his intellectual legacy? Other clues prove more subtle. Certain botanical illustrations have occasionally been compared with plants familiar to Northern Europe, while some artistic conventions resemble styles found in English manuscripts of the late medieval period. These similarities remain tentative rather than conclusive, yet they encourage researchers to consider whether the manuscript may have circulated through England, or even been produced there before traveling abroad. The language itself deepens the puzzle. Linguists have identified recurring structures suggesting grammar, prefixes, suffixes, and repeated word families. Such complexity has persuaded many experts that the text probably encodes meaningful information rather than meaningless decoration. But what kind of language lies beneath the symbols? Is it an encrypted version of a known medieval tongue, an artificial language created for scholarly purposes, or something entirely different? If an English connection exists, one possibility is that the manuscript formed part of a highly specialized intellectual tradition known only to a small circle of educated individuals. Medieval scholars occasionally developed private codes, abbreviated writing systems, and symbolic notations for alchemical, medical, or theological works. Concealing sensitive knowledge was not unknown, particularly when dealing with controversial subjects. Others remain skeptical. They argue that similarities to English manuscripts may simply reflect broader artistic conventions shared across Western Europe. Medieval scholars traveled extensively, exchanging ideas between universities, monasteries, and royal courts. Features appearing English could just as easily have emerged elsewhere through cultural exchange. More speculative theories naturally extend much further. Some suggest the manuscript preserves the work of an isolated scientific community whose methods disappeared entirely. Others imagine it conceals diplomatic intelligence, esoteric philosophy, or forgotten medical traditions encoded to prevent unauthorized readers from accessing valuable knowledge. A few even propose that the manuscript represents a constructed language created centuries before similar linguistic experiments became widely known. None of these possibilities has gained convincing evidence, but each reflects the extraordinary difficulty of explaining a document that has resisted every confident interpretation. The manuscript itself offers remarkably few certainties. Its pages contain no explicit author, no recognizable place names, and no historical events that securely anchor it to one kingdom or another. It speaks in a script that appears purposeful yet remains silent to every reader who approaches it. Today, preserved with extraordinary care, the Voynich manuscript continues to challenge historians, linguists, cryptographers, and scientists alike. Whether its creator worked in England, elsewhere in Europe, or within an intellectual tradition that crossed political boundaries, the book remains one of the medieval world's most enduring enigmas. Perhaps its greatest secret is not simply what it says, but why someone invested such immense effort in creating a manuscript that, after centuries of study, still refuses to reveal whose hands first placed ink upon its pages.